left. Next is Larry Everest. He's a writer for Revolution newspaper and author of book Oil, Power, and Empire.
Thanks, and thanks, Michael and Layla. Earlier this month, Obama met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Both spoke to AIPAC, and the day after, the New York Times headline read, "Obama presses Israel to resist strikes on Iran." Phyllis Bennis wrote, "Obama made it clear at AIPAC that he really doesn't want to go to war against Iran." Many people breathed a sigh of relief. Wrong. Very wrong. If you look at what was actually said by Obama and the deeper forces driving the U.S. and Israel toward attacking Iran, some of what Michael and Layla were laying out, you realize the headline should have read, "Despite tactical differences, U.S. and Israel deepen strategic unity against Iran. Momentum toward war accelerates." So right now, it's urgent that we're sounding the alarm, not lulling people into passivity and acquiescence. So let me begin with what Obama actually said to Netanyahu and at AIPAC, and then I'm going to go on and talk about the deeper forces driving this and what we need to do about it. Obama said, "My policy here is not going to be one of containment. My policy is prevention of Iran obtaining nuclear weapons, and when I say all options are at the table, I mean it." Think about that. First of all, an Israeli think tank noted that never before had U.S. threats against Iran been expressed with such determination and formulated in such unequivocal language. Number two, Obama's threatening to attack Iran if it develops a nuclear weapon, or if the U.S. claims it's developing a nuclear weapon. Even if Iran never makes a bomb, even if Iran never used a bomb, even if Iran never attacked anyone. So what Obama's talking about is a criminal war of aggression. That's what's being talked about. And if anybody saw the New York Times today and read the article, the front page, the U.S. is already shading its intelligence estimate that Iran, as Layla was mentioning and Michael, that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. They're already laying the ground to shift that. Number three, Obama said it used, quote, all elements of American power with a military effort to be prepared for any contingency. All elements of American power includes nuclear weapons. In other words, Obama, the head of the world's most dangerous nuclear weapons state, is threatening a non-nuclear state with a possible nuclear attack. This is using nuclear weapons. This, too, is a war crime. And Michael was talking about the history here of the U.S. threats against Iran. I go into that in my book, but people should know that Jimmy Carter threatened the use of nuclear weapons against the Soviet Union in 1980 over the Persian Gulf. So all of this, everything Obama said isn't reasonable and a step away from war. It's outrageous and intolerable, but I'm not done yet. Obama also said, "We do believe that there's still a window that allows for a diplomatic resolution to this issue. But ultimately, the Iranians regime has to make a decision to move in that direction, a decision that they have not made thus far." Well, let's deconstruct that statement. First, Obama's adding to the fog of disinformation and lies that Iran is likely pursuing nuclear weapons, and they're refusing to give that up and change direction. Second, Obama's hiding or obscuring the fact that the change in direction he and the Israelis are demanding is actually that Iran capitulate to Western bullying and forfeit its right to enrich uranium. You know, this was Michael's point on so-called capacity for nuclear power, which it has the right to have under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Finally, Obama puts the onus for any breakdown in so-called negotiations with Iran, meaning that later And the Guardian speculates in September or October, the Guardian UK, Obama could claim he's walked the last mile for peace, but war is unavoidable. Just the other day, 2-3 days ago, he said the window for diplomacy is shrinking. So all of this is outrageous and intolerable, but again, there's more. Obama repeatedly made clear that the U.S., not just Israel, views the Islamic Republic as a strategic threat. He insisted any differences with Israel were tactical, not strategic. He did not demand that Israel not attack Iran. Instead, he insisted Israel had the right to make its own security decisions and that the United States will always have Israel's back when it comes to Israel's security. In other words, the U.S. is not going to stand in the way of an Israeli attack, and yesterday Panetta said that any war Israel launches, the U.S. would be involved in. All of this, in other words, this latest, pushed the momentum toward war. It didn't prevent war, it pushed things in that direction. And this is just the latest in months of escalating assaults on Iran, the crippling sanctions Layla mentioned, assassinations, sabotage, drone overflights, military shows of force. A lot of people call it a covert war against Iran. Martin Indyk, who's an imperialist theorist and strategist, wrote, "The dynamics of the current situation appear to make conflict inevitable. We're now engaged in a three-way game of chicken in which for Khamenei, the leader of Iran, Netanyahu, and even Obama, physical or political survival makes blinking more dangerous than confrontation." I've written about this extensively in the pages of Revolution, and I'd encourage people to read that. But let's stop and think about what's being threatened here. We're talking about thousands and thousands of lives. In 2006, the Union of Concerned Scientists estimated that if one bunker buster bomb was dropped on the underground facility near Natanz, a massive cloud of radiation would be released, and the casualty figures could be up to 100,000 people. That's on one nuclear site. So this is what we're talking about. But look at, we have a problem because way too many people are walking around in a state of disbelief that war could really happen because they think it would be too insane, or don't the rulers realize how dangerous this would be, or they just think that this is election year posturing or some sort of a frivolous wish of the neocons or the Israeli lobby, or they're deluded about being able to see what's really in Obama's heart, rather than the historical geopolitical perspective that Michael was laying out. And I mean, I'll get into my own views on this, but rather than the bigger picture here. And I don't think it's so much, my own view is it's not so much, in a nutshell, people don't see the logic and the necessities driving the danger of war. And I think we have to start with what's the underlying foundation for everything this society does. The underlying foundation is the necessities and the dynamics of capitalism imperialism, which is a system based on ruthless global competition to exploit labor, control and access resources and markets, and ruthless political military struggle to violently dominate vast swaths of the world. Why do you think the U.S. has been at war in Iraq and Afghanistan for the past 11 years? And then we can go back in history. I think this is the core of it. I don't know that it's, I wouldn't say identity, I'd say the needs of this economic political system. And if you read Obama's new Sustaining U.S. Global Leadership Priorities for 21st Century Defense, it repeatedly links U.S. military superiority, access to and control of various regions of the world with U.S. prosperity. In other words, the functioning power and standing of U.S. capital around the world, all of which is at the core of whether this system maintains itself. And again, you know, for the rulers, as Michael was pointing out, having a stranglehold on the Middle East is not optional. It's been crucial to their position since World War II, and I won't repeat what Michael said, but I think this point of having a chokehold on the oil spigot, on the flow of oil, is crucial now to their global power. In fact, I would argue it's even more crucial in the post-Soviet period, the post-Cold War period, because this has been a time that the U.S. faced both new challenges and new opportunities, and has been driven to attempt to create an unchallenged and unchallengeable empire, including by taking down any regional rivals. And this is precisely what's at stake in the Middle East. It's maintaining hegemony of this region against the regional challenge from Iran. The U.S. and Israel are well aware of the risks of war, but they're increasingly consider the risk of not attacking Iran to be even greater. Why are they threatening Iran knowing it doesn't have nuclear weapons? Why demand a halt to enrichment? A February 24th New York Times piece revealed some truth. Quote, Iran could be seeking to enhance its influence in the region, by creating what some analysts call strategic ambiguity. Rather than building a bomb now, Iran may want to increase its power by sowing doubt among other nations about its nuclear ambitions. In other words, even the possibility Iran could build a bomb at some point, or have the capacity to do so, could enhance its influence, change the regional balance of power, and erode U.S.-Israeli hegemony. Nuclear weapons are extremely dangerous in anyone's hands, including the reactionary regime in Tehran. But the U.S. and Israel aren't threatening Iran to eliminate nuclear weapons. They're threatening Iran to maintain their monopoly of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. And the issue of nuclear weapons is part of something larger, a battle to fortify U.S.-Israeli regional dominance by weakening or taking down the Islamic Republic. Iran isn't a problem for the U.S. because it's a reactionary theocracy, and nor is Iran seeking to challenge the structure of global capitalism. Iran's a problem because it's not fully under the U.S. thumb. It's a strong state with enormous oil wealth and its own needs and ambitions in the region. This is the problem, that this causes problems for the whole U.S. structure of power from Israel to the Gulf states and beyond in this region. And Iran has historically also been a huge prize for different rival empires. The battle now is accelerating because of U.S. failures in Iraq and Afghanistan. People hear about increased Iranian influence in Iraq, and an arc from Iraq all the way to the Mediterranean of possible Iranian influence, or from Iran rather. So there are the failures in Afghanistan, the upheavals across the region, and Iran's refusal to halt its enrichment program or abandon its regional ambitions. Why does Israel loom so large for the U.S.? And I do think this is in part about Israel. Israel doesn't represent Jewish people, it represents imperialism, Western imperialism. It's the U.S.'s unsinkable aircraft carrier and most reliable military and political asset in the region, which is why the U.S. has stood by but is also stuck with Israel. Iran's influence and other regional changes could undermine Israel's position as a Western settler colonial outpost imposed through the violent ethnic cleanse and ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestine and wars against any who challenge it. So that's why it's a threat, not because Iran's going to launch nuclear weapons on Tehran. Patrick Seal put it this way: Israel tried to crush Hezbollah in 2006. It tried to crush Hamas in 2008 and 9. It feels the combination of Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah has made a dent in its military supremacy. Now both the U.S. and Israel believe overthrowing the regimes in Tehran and Damascus will allow them to restore their supremacy. Again, so this is what's driving this threat of war. And the things we're talking about here, the strength of Israel, the control of the Middle East, is considered by the rulers of this country to be essential to their functioning and standing as a global power, which is not a psychological question. It's a question of the functioning of the capitalist imperialist economy in this entire global structure. So the danger of war in coming months is grave and growing. Mass resistance and opposition is urgent. But one obstacle, and I think we have to wrestle with this, why are people passive and how do we change that? One obstacle that too many people are paralyzed by thinking that if they oppose war, that somehow means they support the Islamic Republic. Or if they oppose that regime, then somehow they should be in favor of a war. Bob Avakian's analysis of this dynamic, this is from the new book Basics, is critical to breaking out of this false dichotomy and attendant paralysis. What we see here, and he's talking broadly about the clash between imperialism and various kinds of fundamentalist regimes or movements across the Middle East. What we see in contention here with jihad on the one hand and Macworld, Mac Crusade on the other are historically outmoded strata among colonized and oppressed humanity, like Iran, for example, up against historically outmoded ruling strata of the imperialist system, which pose the far greater danger to the planet. And then he goes on to say these two reactionary poles reinforce each other even while opposing each other, which I felt like a lot of what Layla was talking about in terms of what happens when Iran is threatened to the people there really reflected this. If you side with either of these outmodeds, you end up strengthening both. So mass resistance here in the belly of the beast against the crimes of this government are essential to breaking out of this kind of paralyzing and deadly dynamic and bringing forward a different way that's neither imperialism nor religious fundamentalism. But we need more than that. I mean, look again, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, one horror after the other, and now we're talking about yet another one. The violence used to maintain this system of global exploitation concentrates its utter bankruptcy and utter illegitimacy. This isn't a matter of human nature. It's not centuries-old religious differences. It's the working of a historically evolved economic political system. We need a different system and a radically different state power. We need revolution to get there. It's necessary and it's possible. Because of the work Avakian has done over several decades in sifting through the positive and negative experience of previous communist revolutions as well as human experience broadly, there's a new synthesis of communism that he's brought forward, a viable vision and strategy for a radically new and much better society and world. And there's the leadership that's needed to carry forward the struggle to that goal. So I really encourage and urge people to get into Avakian's work and what he's been wrestling with. I want people to imagine for a moment, we're talking about some really bracing horrors here, both historically and looming in front of us, but I want to end by encouraging people to imagine for just a moment a world after a revolution based on this new synthesis that I've been mentioning. The following's from the Constitution for a New Socialist Republic of North America draft proposal, which the Revolutionary Communist Party published. And it says this: On taking power, we will dismantle all remaining bases of the former imperialist USA and other countries. The new socialist republic renounces all wars of aggression and domination and all occupation of other countries. It will not develop and will not use nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction. It will wage a determined and many-sided struggle to rid the world of all such weapons. It will do this as part of the larger overall struggle to defeat and dismantle all imperialist and reactionary states and forces, and to advance toward the achievement of communism throughout the world, which will finally make it possible for the desires and dreams of countless human beings throughout history and the fundamental interests of humanity for a world without war to at long last be realized. Now that's a future humanity very urgently needs and is very much worth fighting for. Thank you very much.